It is Wednesday, April 10th, 2024. It is 10:33 a.m., not p.m., and you are at a Wausau Waterworks Commission meeting at the City of Wausau. Thank you for joining us. It looks like we have everybody on the commission present. Thank you for being here. The first item on our agenda is to approve the minutes from the February 5th, 2024 meeting. I would entertain a motion. I have a motion by Alder Herbst and a second by Commissioner Jean. Any comments? Alrighty, all those in favor of approving the minutes from February 5th, 2024 can signify by saying aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes. Next up is the Director's Report on Utility Operations. I'll kick it over to Eric, and I think I might have some more things to say as we move on.
Sounds great. Thanks, Mayor. We tried to identify some of the projects that we're working on, as well as some of the operations, our staffing, and others. So if the commissioners have any questions on any of those items, I'll be happy to answer those and have a discussion.
Commissioner Robinson.
So at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about some of the demands that would be placed on you relative to the fiber extensions with Frontier, and one of the items in the minutes was to develop a plan and how we, staffing plan. Where are we relative to that process? And I know Frontier is looking at replacing or placing fiber throughout the city over the next few months. Do we have any plans on how we're going to address that, and what's our ability to recoup some of those costs associated with the locate specifically to some of those efforts?
The ability to recoup is we don't have an ability to recoup. We do charge permit fees. Up in engineering, they need to request work on our right-of-way, some permits. Mm-hmm. As far as the plan for those, obviously right now we're just allocating resources as the locates come in. We are currently, myself, are currently working on developing, a spreadsheet showing work hours and demands that we have available, along with the last couple of years with demands, between what's happened the last couple of years, as well as what's coming up with new regulations and those demands that are going to be put on the utility. And we'll bring those back to this commission so that they can see. And that's part of that staffing support to increase staffing at the utility.
So where do we have a time frame in context of the budget on when we might have that or see that here? As we do locates, it takes away staff from other activities, and
correct.
So we've been, with TDS coming in, now with Frontier coming in, and
Right.
I think we're probably saturated with fiber, but who knows?
Yeah, we have Frontier, we have Bug Tussle. I think there's another one in the city as well, putting in fiber. And I don't think it's just this year. It's probably for the next 2 to 3 years until, everything kind of gets saturated again with all of the providers, right, competing again. So
The federal dollars run out.
that's true too. So, but to answer your question about timing, we've been working on that. We're kind of hoping in May, but it won't be any later than June. Yeah. So.
Okay. Other questions? Commissioner Jean, then Commissioner Forrest.
Item 2, under the wastewater division, I think that reduction in our 101 environmental fee speaks volume. So I want to thank you folks. And I think it also tells you the quality or how efficient the new facility is to make that reduction. The other question the question I have is, I noticed there was a number of applicants that turned down the job or didn't accept our offers. Do we have any idea if they took another job, what they were paid as starting?
So the two candidates that declined market wage rate were working at utilities in the local area in hopes that we could capture them and sign them on, but we couldn't offer them enough where we're at mid-market. So they more than likely stayed where they were at. And these were very good utilities that these candidates were coming from. So
So we don't have the HR director here, but in the past, sometimes we have, I've been requested to approve higher salaries, and more often than not, I have approved those. I don't remember getting anything on these, though, so.
You did not, for the simple reason that we would go over what the existing employees would be making. And that's not fair to them.
Yes, Mr. Jean.
Do you recall what that hourly rate would be?
Mid-market.
Yeah.
Was close to 29 an hour, I believe.
It would be 29?
Yes.
That was
Maybe
our
fine.
offer?
That was our offer. 28, close to 29. I can't remember what the exact value was, or figure was.
But if they're coming from another utility,
Yes. Speaks volume.
yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Force.
I wanted to get back to John's discussion on locates. TDS, Frontier, these are profit-making organizations, right? And the cost of locates falls to us? It doesn't fall to them at all?
Correct, because we own those facilities.
Yeah.
By state statute, it's our responsibility to locate them.
And we can't charge them a fee for the services that we're providing?
No, the only fee that we can charge is the permit fee, for them working in the right-of-way.
Well, I understand the rules and regulations here and what we can and cannot do, but it seems to me that this problem keeps coming back to us at almost every meeting. It's been going on for well over a year, and obviously it's going to continue for another year or two. And it seems to me that the people putting the fiber cable in the ground should be paying the cost of the locates, and if that requires an additional employee or additional employees or portions of existing employees, that they ought to be paying for that rather than us. I don't know how to get around the rules and regulations here, but that's my feeling. It's the cost of them doing business, and it's enabling them to increase their business base. And they've provided valuable service. I have no problem with that. But it seems to me that a profit-making organization ought to pay the costs of putting in the fiber optic cable that's going to produce revenue for them. Enough said.
I might suggest, I obviously won't be here, but you could talk to your state legislators about
Okay.
changing the law, because
Okay.
it is a compelling argument, obviously.
And it would seem to me it's going on everywhere. We're not the only ones getting
We'll
fiber
probably
optic
get
in the
critical
ground.
mass to lobby for that.
Okay.
They'll probably be back in session in January.
Thanks for the tip.
Anything else on this report?
I did one other thing. Where's the status of the LSR ordinance, Eric?
Well, where do we leave that, Scott? So right now, we have our draft in place at this point in time. And, I guess there was a number of questions to the commission. We can bring that back next month as well and update that on, direction for that. We had talked about, is it going to be feasible to get this through by the end of June when we close on these loans? But I don't think that was practical with some of the conversations that we had here. So we do plan on continuing to pursue that.
Okay.
And who's here to present today too with Horsley Witten with the US EPA Lead Service Line Accelerator Program. They've been working with us on that as well, developing that as we move forward. So
Okay, but I'm assuming that we'll see drafts as they come forward?
for sure. Yes,
Okay.
you absolutely will.
Thank you.
All right, anything else on this report? Otherwise, we will go ahead and place it on file. All right, thank you. Moving on to item number 3, presentation by Ellers related to debt service, possible projects, and new staffing.
So this came in late, sent it out in an email this morning, but then also you have some hard copies of this. And this is really what the water utility and the sewer utilities debt capacity is at this point in time. When we look at the current debt that they have and repayment, and then also the projects that were approved for the 2024 Safe Drinking Water and Clean Water Fund program for principal forgiveness and loans. And so, and then what that looks like with our debt capacity if we take on those projects and close on those loans in June. So for each utility, we have the capacity to do that. As you can see on the spreadsheets on the appendices that Ellers has attached. And the only project that's not included in here is the lead service line project, which has about a $2.1 million loan component to it. Because those services are all gonna be on the private side, we cannot use water rates to pay for that work. So that loan that comes along with that project will have to be paid from some other source. Yeah.
Any comments, questions? Yes, Commissioner Robinson.
Eric and I had a opportunity before the meeting to just talk about, I'm not sure the timing of some of these is correct in there, but, so what I'm not necessarily looking at this as in terms of debt capacity, but rather cash flow and when debt services is done on certain historic issues. So if we would time future issues, we could not have an impact on rates. So what would be helpful is that, do we have additional capital projects and capital needs that are not reflected in current borrowing going forward that could impact our total debt service going forward? It would be nice to have that information. And then does a question relative to the lead service line replacements, if we have the mandatory ordinance in place, does that change the dynamics relative to the private side of the lead replacement in using rate dollars for that?
Yeah, we'd be able to use up to 50% of rate dollars to pay 50% of the cost of the private side lead
So
replacement.
the statement you made earlier is predicated upon the existing policy of the city, and we could change it, so those would be one of the factors that we would have to evaluate going forward.
Right.
So how do we run, so is our goal here to maintain debt service? Because I think this is really a debt service, showing us where the debt service, and we've got in 3 years a drop off in some debt service. So can we structure our debt in such a way as to minimize future impacts? And it would be nice to have a discussion along those lines at a future meeting.
Yeah, and I think you certainly will, because we're preparing a 5-year capital plan right now, and that's really what significantly impacts our debt, right? And so as we look at our priority projects and the conflicts and priorities that we have, that's going to be a discussion that we'll have with the commission, and how we address those conflicting priorities with our projects. Yeah.
Mr. Force.
Eric, on this report from Ellers, on the back of the first sheet, there's a summary, but I'm more interested in Appendix A and Appendix B. Can you comment? I don't expect you to walk us through this at this meeting, but it seems to me this contains the detail that I'm interested in, and maybe John's interested in as well, as, going out into the future. And when we say we have enough borrowing capacity, what is that borrowing capacity? I mean, what's the number?
We do have the finance director here who
Yeah,
can answer some of your
okay.
questions. We can do that.
Hey, Marianne.
Hi. So if we focus first on Appendix A, which
Thank
is
you.
the water system revenues, the column, so he's comparing our sort of historic 21, 22 financial results for the water utility as compared to what we are looking at today for 23. We still are in the process of closing our 23 financial records. But these are our best estimates at this point. And then the following column, because water rates were not implemented until July 1, we had basically, more than half a year without those current rates in effect. So he's projecting that rate. At first, we thought that looked a little high. I did go and calculated on my own this morning, and I feel like it's a good rate. So he's saying, in '24, if we had that full amount, our rates for the water would be 12 million. Our operating expenses in '23 were the 4.5, and that leaves us with net revenues available for debt service in '23 at the 5.5 projected out next year. Again, given that expenses have not shown any inflation, we would have 7.8. And then he's listed what the actual maximum debt service is for each one of the existing issues, 2017C, 2019D, and then the 490/3009, which is our big water treatment plant construction, which is the 2.8 million. And then if we would, based on the projects that we're currently expecting to issue debt, the 13 million, which is the GAC refinancing, which, we took out 17.5. We're thinking we'll have to issue actual permanent debt of the 13 million, so that's 800,000. So the total debt issuance based on that would be 4.3 million, and we are required to have 110% debt coverage, so we have to have in reserves the 110%. So this year, we would have $826,000 left. Obviously, next year, that would increase based on those increase in revenues that we'll receive with the expense inflation, unknown at this time. So we are sitting in a good place where we would have sufficient funds. And again, as you brought up, we'll have new projects in 2025. Obviously, in 2022, in 2023, we financed most of our, underground replacements with ARPA money. We'll have that pretty much exhausted by that time, though the ARPA is still funding some of the projects, mainly in the sewer, though, not so much in water for future. So I think water, looks good. One of the things that I've been a little concerned about is the impact of conservation on our ability to actually get to these targets, because you don't really know, what type of conservation will take place by homeowners, by business owners, as the rates have increased. And then the sewer shows very similar results. Obviously, we had planned on future rate increases. I think this shows that we would not have to pull the trigger on those in the foreseeable future, based on the projects that we've laid out there. Again, $11 million in revenue for the sewer, 3.8 in expenses, leaving us 7.5 million available for debt service. The annual maximum amount is 5.2, which leaves us about 1.7 then for reinvestment in slip lining, in our street projects, we have a number of lift stations that we're going to be redoing. So we do have healthy maintenance, ongoing updates that need to be done.
Mr. Force.
Where is the pilot expense in this?
So the pilot is not in this calculation.
Okay.
It doesn't show up in the repairs, in the operations and maintenance, nor does it show up in
Current expenses?
Yeah.
It does not show?
It does not.
All right.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, so we will go ahead and place that on file as well. Next up is item number 4, presentation by Horsley Witten. This is our US EPA Lead Service Line Accelerator Program consultant on funding options and overview. We have some folks here in person, and are there people online too?
Yes.
Yes, all right, so we're well covered.
Yeah, so they've been working with us with the through the US EPA Accelerator Program. They were here a couple months ago with a presentation. This presentation today is on lead service line, potential funding sources with the DNR, and kind of walking the commission through opportunities for the city and what is out there, as well as what other communities are doing. So, Gemma?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, and thank you for having us today. My name is Gemma Kite. I'm a senior environmental engineer with the Horsley Witten Group, and I'm joined virtually by my colleagues Nick Cohen from the Horsley Witten Group, as well as Janet Cherry from the Eastern Research Group, ERG. I'm just going to give a brief minute overview of who we are and what this project is about before I turn it over to Janet for the presentation. So the Horsley Witten Group and ERG together, we are contractors to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and we are providing technical assistance to Wausau under the EPA Lead Service Line Replacement Accelerators Initiative. It's important to note that we ourselves are not EPA employees. We are technical assistance contractors. This program initiative provides technical assistance to 10 water systems across Wisconsin, as well as to systems in 3 other states, to advance progress towards a goal of lead-free water systems and to identify best practices that we can share with other water systems across the nation. So the technical assistance that we provide to our systems can cover support for service line inventory, replacement planning, such as helping to draft ordinance language, as well as community engagement. We also provide support for helping communities prepare their funding applications. So the idea with this technical assistance is to augment, but certainly not replace, any work that Wausau is already doing on this project. And it's important to note that this program does not impose any costs to the water systems that are participating, and it is not a regulatory enforcement program, but rather a technical assistance program. So we, as EPA contractors, we are not here to advocate for any local policies or impose any additional regulatory requirements, and our technical assistance does not supersede any existing processes in Wausau. So as Eric mentioned, we've been working with him to help draft a mandatory lead service line replacement ordinance over the last few months. You may remember me a few months ago when I presented on that topic to this commission. And we've been following closely the Commission's discussion on this topic and noted that there were a couple questions and comments related to funding for replacements. And so we thought it would be helpful to present some high-level overview information on the sources, options, and strategies for funding both private and public lead service line replacements. So with that, I'll turn it over to Janet, who's going to be walking us through a few slides.
Great. Thank you, Gemma. Can you hear me, Gemma?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. Good morning, Eric and commissioners and others there in attendance. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning and share information. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you to whoever's operating the slides. I don't think I have control. Good. All right, great. Thank you so much. So this morning we'll talk about different options for funding the lead service line replacements. I already heard some questions from the commissioners around what are the options for covering the cost for doing all of these replacements, both on the public and private side. We'll go over the funding options that are offered by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and congratulations for securing a very nice funding package from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. We'll discuss use of ratepayer funds, which just as a reminder, anytime you want to use ratepayer funds, you will be subject to the Public Service Commission or PSC approval. We'll talk briefly about the community development block grant funding that the city receives, and if there's an ability to access a portion of that funding for the private side lead service line replacement, and a few other options. We will go over your current funding package, the different mechanisms for the private lead service line replacements, and some strategies to consider as you move forward. This is quite a big project that you're undertaking, and recognize there's a lot to consider. All right, next slide, please. So let's start with the Wisconsin DNR, Department of Natural Resources Safe Drinking Water Loan Program. This program's been around for a long time in your state, The program can provide funding in the form of both a loan and principal forgiveness. The way these projects are, that the funding source that Wisconsin DNR has that they make available to municipalities like Wausau, they receive a grant called a capitalization grant each year from EPA, along with the repayments they receive from past funded projects. So that's how the projects are funded. Specific to the lead service line work, which is the focus of our presentation today, this is a special pot of money that was authorized by Congress under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And this funding has been authorized for 5 years, 2022 through 2026. And again, it's a specific pot of money to help municipalities with their replacement of the lead service lines. So this is a brand new program for Wisconsin DNR and other states across the country to implement. So everybody's learning right now as we go on this new funding program and all the requirements. Next slide. So in 2022, the first year that DNR had the lead service line replacement funding as authorized under the bipartisan infrastructure law, they had about 41.7 million. And then in 2023, they had approximately 67.1 million available. And what Wisconsin did is they made both of these sources of funding available last year that many municipalities applied for and received funding. So that's a lot of money, but unfortunately, that does not come close to meet the demand. But Wisconsin DNR is doing the best they can to make this funding available. They're prioritizing the private side replacement funding. But eligible projects under this funding include both public and private side. But again, Wisconsin DNR is prioritizing the private side replacement as part of their funding strategy. And they can also fund your inventory. And I know Eric and staff are very busy continuing to work on the inventory to identify where all of these lead service lines are galvanized requiring replacement, where those lines exist to better inform where the work will occur. As I said, this funding can be issued as both a loan and principal forgiveness. So anything that's tagged as principal forgiveness is the portion of the loan you will not be required to repay. And the way the principal forgiveness is calculated is based on a number of socioeconomic factors such as median household income, family poverty percentage, and other data specific to the area within the census block. I just want to mention here, we can do a lot of estimation and prediction on how much principal forgiveness Wausau could qualify for based on the current way in which Wisconsin DNR awards principal forgiveness, but we cannot predict what the final award, the funding award will look like and what portion will be loan versus what portion will be principal forgiveness. The way it works, Wisconsin DNR receives a lot of funding applications. They score and rank those so you're competing against other municipalities. And then after all projects have been scored and ranked, they start figuring out the award, the amount of funding to award, and the percentage of loan versus principal forgiveness. So it's really hard to predict exactly what the final funding award will look like, but we can certainly help you understand what your possible or potential for principal forgiveness could look like. All right, next slide. So as mentioned, DNR has made funding available and will continue to make funding available specifically for the lead service line replacement efforts through 2026. The competition for this funding is expected to increase as municipalities across the state start identifying where their lead service lines are and will start submitting funding packages. It's been a little slow going for municipalities to put together funding packages because they didn't know where all their lead service lines are. But because the inventory is due in October of 2024, everybody's busy now identifying lead service lines and getting their funding packages together. So I do expect to see a larger request for funding than in the past. We have no idea if Congress will continue to appropriate funding for this effort for the lead service line replacement after 2026. So, municipalities have some strategies for maximizing principal forgiveness. You can focus on certain census tracts, and we'll talk a little more about the census tract approach to maximize principal forgiveness in certain areas of your city, and the pros and cons of that approach. Just want to remind everybody in the room that the Wisconsin DNR funding, that's not regulated by PSC. So how you work with the private homeowners with that funding, that's up to Wausau and DNR to figure out. That is not, there's no limits on the 50% grant amount when it's all Wisconsin DNR funding. All right, next slide. So Wausau does have 13 census tracts, and Gemma, do you want to talk a little bit about the census tracts? Are you able to do that?
Sure.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'll just take a moment because I don't want to get too into the details of this. But as Janet was mentioning, the city can decide to submit a funding application that would be suitable for project work across all census tracts, across the entire municipality, or elect to submit an application for just one census tract or a couple different census tracts, including, multiple census tracts as well. So, basically, the way that DNR takes these applications is they score it based on the various socioeconomic factors, including median household income, unemployment rates, population, things like that. And so obviously the data kind of shifts from year to year. So we take the latest data, we evaluate it, and we come up with an estimated principal forgiveness amount. And so depending how the data looks and the calculations work out, it may be in Wausau's best interest to focus a funding application in one or two or three of the census tracts where they're going to have the most amount of points and therefore the most amount of estimated principal forgiveness. That is, of course, if there are eligible lead service lines or unknowns that are worth replacing or that are eligible for replacement in those census tracts. So this is an ongoing conversation that we are having with Eric to gear up for the fiscal year 2025 funding application that's due later this June.
Great, thank you, Gemma. Next slide, please. All right. So I heard mentioned earlier in the meeting using ratepayer funds to help pay for replacement of the private side lead service lines. So if Wausau does intend to use any ratepayer funds to assist with the cost that the private homeowner faces for the lead private side replacement, if that's a decision made by the commission, then the municipality will need to seek the Public Service Commission approval. As part of that process, the PSC does limit the amount Wausau can issue as a grant, so no loan for the private homeowner. It's limited to 50% of the cost, and then the remaining cost either is repaid by the homeowner in the form of a loan or Wausau identifies other funding that's available for the homeowner that would not be subject to PSC approval. And again, the Wisconsin DNR Safe Drinking Water Loan Program funding that you currently have is not subject to PSC approval. As part of the PSC approval, Wausau would need to have an ordinance that mandates customer side lead service line replacement. and specifically state how the municipality will make loans, grants, or other funding available for the property owner. So this is quite a process that's required to go through with PSC. Another option for Wausau to fund the private side replacement, Wausau could issue a general obligation note, not a bond, and pledge to cover the private side replacement costs. So that is another option the city could consider. Next slide, please. Community Development Block Grant. This is a great source of funding. The city receives funding each year through the Housing and Urban Development Program. And this funding can be used anywhere for project areas or census tract where 51% or more of the households are deemed low to moderate income based on the Housing and Urban Development's database. So this funding can be used for the private side replacement. I know Eric is looking into this. This funding would be issued as a grant. And I think if Wausau does consider this, and again, it's a great source, just how you would make it available and prioritize who would benefit from this funding. I'm under the impression, based on conversations with Eric, there may not be a lot of money available to do this, so you'll have to think about how you prioritize it. And then the last bullet here, I know your consultant, Community Infrastructure Partner, CIP, are looking at other philanthropic funding sources to help these homeowners with replacement of lead service lines. Next slide, please. There is an ability to develop what's called an alternative revenue pledge for private lead service line replacement. So Wisconsin DNR would allow the municipality to create a whole new program or a whole new utility separate from the water utility to administer replacement of lead service lines. No PSC approval is required if you do take this approach. Municipalities will most likely need to pass 2 ordinances to make this approach work. So you'll need an ordinance to create a whole new program utility and also have the mandatory lead service line replacement ordinance in place. Wisconsin DNR has recommended somebody at the municipality oversee this program besides a water utility staff person to demonstrate adequate separation of duties. This is not a new funding source, it's just a new method to administer funding. I did sit in on a webinar, and there's a webinar posted on the Wisconsin DNR website you can watch to learn more about this approach. But this is a new initiative. Everybody's still learning about it. But what I heard on the webinar is the municipalities view this as just really quite burdensome and probably easier to access some of the other funding sources that we've already talked about. All right, next slide. So let's talk about your current funding package that you have received from Wisconsin DNR. This is just an excellent funding package. Good job, Eric, on getting that. I just want to note, Wausau was second in the amount of funding for lead service line replacement to Milwaukee. So this was a big award, $5.79 million, with $3.64 million as principal forgiveness. So the city doesn't need to worry about repaying that amount, but the remaining amount, approximately $2.15 million, will be needs to be repaid as a loan, and it's at 0.25%, which is just an outstanding rate. So as a condition of this funding, Wausau will need to demonstrate full lead service line replacement on both the public and private side. So that's a condition of the funding that EPA has placed. Well, I shouldn't say EPA hasn't. It came down from Congress as part of the appropriation through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So you need to demonstrate you will do full lead service line replacement. In order to do that, Wisconsin DNR strongly encourages municipalities to have an ordinance that mandates customers replace their lead service line. And then municipalities are required to adopt a reimbursement resolution. You had to do this as part of your funding application, but just an important step in this process. So specifically to this funding package, it focused on 3 census tracts, which is what allowed for the very high percentage of principal forgiveness that was awarded. The 3 census tracts chosen showed the economic need and financial need for this much assistance. So that was a very good strategic move in how this funding package was submitted and then the funding awarded. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk about just some mechanisms and what it could look like for Wausau as you consider how to cover that loan portion, the $2.15 million of your current DNR funding package. So I think this was mentioned earlier in the meeting about, debt service and how do you spread this loan repayment out across ratepayers, or do you even do that? So if that was an option Wausau wanted to do, to spread out the loan repayment across all ratepayers, that would require PSC approval. So again, if that's something you considered, then you must go through the PSC approval process. If you don't want to do that, the next option would be you would issue private loan agreements with each homeowner to cover the percentage of the replacement that isn't covered by your principal forgiveness. So this is not subject to PSC approval, and Wausau already has this process in place, which is great. So with this mechanism entering into the individual agreements with the homeowners, the homeowner does have the ability or has the option to pay the remaining portion not covered by principal forgiveness. They can pay it immediately if they have the financial means to do so. If not, they can enter into an agreement with Wausau for repayment. And I just have to say that's got to be a lot of administrative oversight on the part of your staff there in Wausau. And Eric, you had asked earlier about any penalties for early prepayment on this loan, and there are no penalties for early prepayment. So that is good news. And again, we talked about the CDBG funding. If that is a source Wausau does consider using, I think you'd need to strategize when and how you would make that available to the individual homeowners. All right, next slide. So again, you've been successful with the DNR funding for the lead service line replacement, and I know you're working on another funding package to submit by the end of June this year. This funding is just going to be very competitive. There's not enough funding to cover all the cost. So it's very competitive, and as each community throughout Wausau continues to do their inventory and identify where they need to do the replacements, the more applications Wisconsin DNR will see. And then that makes the principal forgiveness portion more competitive. For now, we can only assume the lead service line replacement funding will be offered through 2026. That doesn't mean Wisconsin DNR will stop funding these projects. They just won't have the pot of money they have now specifically for this project that comes with very good principal forgiveness terms. So they can continue funding projects. It would just be a different source of funding, and again, not as much principal forgiveness that we currently see. So in order to make your application more competitive, one thing Wausau could consider is having the mandatory replacement ordinance in effect by June 30th to receive additional points on their application. The higher you score, the more likely you'll get a better portion of principal forgiveness on your project. Gemma talked about the census tract approach. as you can see with your current funding package, focusing on 3 census tracts that would score high for principal forgiveness resulted in a 63% principal forgiveness award. So you could submit applications by census tracts, but what this means is you have multiple funding applications, which could result in multiple funding agreements that are issued by DNR that you'll have to oversee and track. So it is an administrative burden, but it could result in a lot more principal forgiveness. Or, you could submit one application across multiple tracts or for your entire city, but again, you may not qualify for as much principal forgiveness as compared to if you focus on certain census tracts. So Wausau, it's not too early to communicate with your customers. I'm not sure all of the communications you've done, but just really important to let your customers know how hard you are working on this issue, the current funding you have, your strategy to apply for and hopefully receive future funding. But also important to let your customers know you can't control how the funding gets awarded by DNR. You'll do your best to put forward a funding application that maximizes principal forgiveness, but you can't commit to what that will be until DNR receives all of their funding application scores and ranks them, and then decides on the principal forgiveness amount each applicant will receive. Next slide. So other communities across Wisconsin, they are working on their mandatory ordinance and working with PSC to get approval. Having this ordinance definitely demonstrates to DNR that you do have the ability to require full lead service line replacement, which is again a requirement of the funding. And you'll get additional points on your funding application if you have it passed by the time you submit your funding application June 30th. So Wausau, what do you need to consider? Continue working on building out your inventory. The more you can show where you have lead service lines, the more competitive your application will be. Develop a communication plan to communicate funding strategies to customers, and continue working on how you will fund those private side replacements, the source of funding, and how you'll make the funding available to each homeowner. And I think that's all I have. And Eric, I think you've got some great slides to share on the dashboard.
Yeah, I think there's a couple here. I just wanted to show some examples of what our GIS division is doing. As of October of this year, we're going to need to be forward-facing with the public on where our inventory is at. And so Dan in his division, which he's been doing a ton of work on, working directly with CIP as they go through the inventory. And so not only citywide is he identifying, do you want to go to the next slide too, Gina? Citywide for lead service lines unknowns and others, but he's also breaking it down per census tract for, different areas of the city. And I think having this data, and so our inventory as we move forward week to week and month to month is actually, it's living document, right? So as the inventory gets updated, Dan updates this. So this will be updated in current time throughout the website. It's not live currently, still being developed, but it will be sometime late summer this year. So, and that's part of the lead and copper rule with the US EPA as well. Jim?
Is this Tract 602 just an example, or is it a priority?
It's one that we're working in this year.
Okay.
For replacements, but it's a tract in the city that we're currently working in. And then another one is the last slide, which is Census Tract 8 as well, so.
All right, it looks like we have some questions. Commissioner Robinson.
So Eric, do we have an idea of where the lead service lines are relative to the various census tracts? Have we broken that down in terms of maximizing the principal forgiveness? If we're looking
Yeah,
at,
actually, we started having those conversations. I mean, we do, I think, in a general sense, John, but I think like as we move forward, we're going to be working with Horsley Witten. They're going to break down each of those in detail for us and then run some potential scenarios, right, on how we can maximize principal forgiveness scoring. And so that's some of the technical assistance they're going to provide us with for when we apply for projects for 25.
so I think what would be helpful for the commission is, as we look at this, we've got the public side, as best we can we identify those costs? Can we then look at what the private side would be, because that would be those impacted by the mandatory ordinance? And then we have that lingering issue of compliance and post-work monitoring and those costs of that initial and 6-month follow-up inspection. It would be nice if we could get all of those costs identified, and then if you feel as if there are additional costs associated with staffing associated with the accelerator program, what those might be, so we can look at what are our capital costs. And again, we've got a short window. We've got we're putting in basically the application this year for funding for next year. And if in 2026 we're running out, we don't have a lot of rounds left. So I think that the sooner we can get that information relative to making those decisions, the better.
So do you want it, John, for 25, 26, and possibly 27? I mean, is that, are you looking for, like, kind of what we would see for a capital and our debt potential, broken out on what the utility might see, staying on this track that we're on? Is that what you're looking for? Not just 1 year, right?
Right,
I guess that's my
right. It'd be a
question.
multi-year projection, and we were looking at, 500, 1,500,
Yeah.
Going back to the original, the original plan, but sort of mapping that out, knowing what our exposure is going forward. Because, hypothetically, we could run into a situation with the safe drinking water funding where we make assumptions relative to future eligibility and the fund dries up.
Correct.
There's always been some funding, but now we've got that accelerated funding, but I think we have to be prepared for what happens if we stay at the current accelerated funding level beyond 2026? What happens if we go back to historic funding levels? What might that mean for ratepayers as we're looking at that? That gets into the timing. It's all information we would need for that ordinance, because if we're going to go a mandatory 5-year compliance schedule versus at one time we were talking 10 to 15 years,
Right.
That's material to the discussion that both this commission and the city council will need to have going forward. So I think the sooner we get that information, the better we can plan going forward.
But, yeah, I appreciate that, because that helps with some of those questions we need answered for that ordinance. So I appreciate that, yeah.
So I have a question for Horsley Witten. When you said that Wausau was second only to Milwaukee when it comes to getting funding, and they submitted multiple applications for these different census tracts, what does that look like when it comes to the principal forgiveness that we're getting? Like just as a percentage or something like that? And was that something we should probably aspire to? Or maybe that's a question to be followed up later.
Yeah, give me just a minute to
Okay.
pull up the funding list.
Okay.
I don't know if I can share my screen. Is that possible?
You might be able to if there's at the bottom.
Okay, I will
Okay.
give it a try. Let me pull that up. Just give me a minute if you want to move on to another.
Okay, I saw that Mr. Force has a question.
Yeah, a question in general. Money that's obligated toward lead service line replacement, irrespective of the source, is there a deadline on spending that? In other words, if we receive money in 2024, does it have to be spent by a date certain?
Go ahead, Gemma. Yeah.
I'll start and then I'll have Janet or Nick confirm. But it depends. The time frame depends on whether you're using a municipal contract to carry out the work or whether you're using pre-qualified list of plumbers. So the municipal contract, if that's what you're going to use, is the duration of the contract. So if you are able to secure a 5-year contract to do the work, that's when the funding would need to be spent by. If it's a pre-qualified list of plumbers, I believe the time frame is 3 years. And Janet or Nick, you can confirm that for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, Gemma, I think you're right, but I'd have to look that up again to make sure I don't mess that up. But that should be in your, when you do receive your financial assistance agreement, the time of performance will be spelled out in your financial assistance agreement. But yeah, there is a time frame to perform all this work, which is a very important consideration. Just because I don't know where you're going to find all the contractors in your state to do all this work for all the municipalities. I just don't know how all this work will get performed, where it's just really escalating quickly, the amount of work. So I don't know, has that been an issue yet for Wausau? Just finding enough contractors?
Yeah, I mean,
Let me say qualified contractors.
yeah, there's a lot of questions, you know. I mean, we have some smaller outfits. When we talk about 500 or 600 replacements in a year, some of them, you know, their capacity might be 100, you know. And so as we ramp this project up, you know, we considered local is statewide. So we have some larger contractors as well. So I think those are going to be challenges as we move forward for everybody. I think to get back to Jim's question too, you know, you can, you know, if we're contracting out this work, as Gemma said, I mean, we can extend this from year to year, Jim. Like, you know, the money doesn't have to be spent in that year, but it looks a lot better when you go in the following year if you are already spending that money, you know, for the DNR rather than trying to accumulate it. That's been our experience with multiple year funding requests. Yeah.
And I know that we've also had commitments from labor to start training people, particularly LiUNA in their DeForest facility, to train more plumbers to do this work. All right, I see a spreadsheet. This is exciting.
Yes.
Sorry, Jen, this is Nick.
Yeah.
Let me just add, I did confirm in our notes from DNR that if a pre-qualified contractors list is used, the funding requirement is a 2-year period. And like you guys said, if it's a municipal contract, it's the life of the contract. So if it's a 5-year contract or whatever it might be, that's acceptable as long as it's the life of the contract.
Thank you.
Yep, very good. Thank you, Nick. So the list I'm sharing on the screen, this is publicly available on the Wisconsin DNR website. I apologize, it's probably coming up quite small. I've got it at 100% to allow us to see all of the columns at one time. But you'll see about the 4th row down is these, let me just first say, these are the cities that submitted applications for lead service line replacement. This is the order in which they scored and ranked. So Green Bay was first. You'll see Milwaukee, the first Milwaukee application, number 4, 10.4 million. The private side request was 5.125. That was all issued as 100% principal forgiveness. And then the public side replacement at 5.275 million received 55% principal forgiveness. And then there's a second Milwaukee application that scored lower. So they were doing this by census tract, I'm guessing. They were, the highest ranking one was the census tract one. Then it looks like their second application was perhaps citywide because it says municipal versus census tract. And that was a request for 10.6 million, 8 million for private side replacement at 100% principal forgiveness. But as I look through this list, even though Wausau ranked lower, you had the second largest award amount with your 5.1 million. So anyhow, you can access this on the DNR website and see what the competition was and how Wausau compared with the other applicants.
But it sounds like census tract is kind of the way to go, multiple applications. I'm seeing nodding in the audience too, so thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Force.
Eric, I had a question on these dashboards. The largest category on the customer side is unknown. So how do we deal with that? We continue to examine or inspect or make estimates or?
Yeah, we actually, for the inventory, the requirement is we have to physically get eyes on, right? So we have, for homeowners online, they can do their own inspection and submit pictures for us to review. That has really just started getting some hits. It's been out there for about a month. But otherwise, we are setting up, appointments with individuals within the census tracts that we're working to get eyes on. The other challenge that we have is, because the city is older, there are areas where there used to be meters and pits, and so those meters were brought up, and typically copper was used to extend and would tie into the lead, right? So it looks like copper coming through, but then we have to somehow expose or go outside with that hydro excavating. And we have a list of sites right now. I think it's up to just over 50 that we're going to have to verify outside the home by doing hydro excavating or some other method.
Mr. Jean.
I think we need to truly clarify what this work is, because I've had a lot of people say, oh, you're changing the plumbing, the entire home. That is not true. All of us know in this room, it is the service line from the main to the property line, which is the utilities under the utility ownership, and it's from the property line into the building, likely to the meter. Nothing else. So I hope that resolves some of those questions that I've received. I just need clarification. Can we, under the terminology I better understand, special assess the private side, or is that loan assessment? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, typically what we would do is, if that was the decision, right, that the homeowners would pay a portion of that, then there would be a loan that would be set up with the homeowner that they could either set up payments or pay it out front. Is that correct, Marianne? That's how, is it set up as a special assessment, or it is? Okay. And then they could set up either payments or pay it, right? With their real estate tax, yes. Okay, so,
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Mr. Force.
I'm sorry, one more question. The presentation, which was very good, by the way, pointed out the necessity for effective communications. Is CIP taking the lead on that, or are we having any input? What's the status?
We're having some, but they're really taking the lead on that, Jim.
Can we get a report, maybe at the next meeting, on what they're doing and if they've moved ahead, if any of this has been effective? Because I've been talking about this for a number of meetings, and I apologize for that, but it's really important, and I think the presentation pointed it out again. So I'd like to know if they're doing it, what they're doing, if we have some responsibility, what we plan to do.
Yeah, I think, I've been in contact with them. We had talked about having something at this meeting. I don't think we're quite ready yet. We have bids opening up next week, and so I believe we will have something formal update for you in May at the meeting, Jim, in this commission, yeah.
Other questions, comments? Otherwise, thank you so much for, you got something?
This is Nick again from Horsley Witten. I just wanted to make one quick clarification on the census tract approach. And just reiterate that the devil's really in the details, and I know Gemma's going to go through some of this with Eric, I think at a later date, but we have seen think at least one municipality where actually they were potentially eligible for more principal forgiveness municipality-wide than at the individual census tract level because of some nuance with the numbers. So obviously don't need to get into all the specifics now, but it is important for each municipality to look at it strategically in their own case, as well as think about the administrative burden that Janet went through. So it's hard to make kind of a blanket statement of what the best approach is for all municipalities, and that's why going through the specifics is helpful. So just wanted to provide that clarification. And then on the communications and engagement piece, that is an element where we as EPA contractors are also able to support if necessary. Going back to, I think the first comment Gemma made, we certainly don't want to duplicate any efforts that are going on. So that's part of the reason our work has mostly been with this commission and with some of the behind the scenes work like ordinance language or doing some calculations. But if it's helpful for us to coordinate with CIP or coordinate with you all with CIP, we are able to do that. Again, not wanting to duplicate efforts, but we can help where needed to on that communications as appropriate.
Great, thank you. And thank you for this presentation. All right, we are going to go ahead and move on then. We are now on to item number 5, discussion and possible action deferring the 2024 annual loan payment from the water utility to the sewer utility. Who wants to take that?
Do you want to do this, Mary Ann? Thanks.
Obviously, one of the metrics that Moody's looks at for bond ratings is cash, available cash. The water utility was at a bit of disadvantage because we had to wait for the PSC to actually change our rates. And so the cash of the sewer utility, as was shown in the projections for the bond capacity test, is much better than the water. So we thought, you had that advance from the sewer utility to the water. There were annual payments of $140,000. We are suggesting that we delay the 23 payment and then consider that payment for 2024 to just help with the cash position of the water utility during this period where we've been phasing in the rates. And we think that the sewer utility could manage that. It would be a one-time deferral.
Questions, comments? Mr. Robinson?
So is this basically a function of the audit? And
Yes.
so we're showing the same revenues, we're continuing to carry an obligation, but not
Yep.
an expense?
Right. You would just, the money would be transferred later. We've typically done this at year end, actually show the transfer over for that payment. And so as we're getting ready for the 23 audit, we thought, well, this would help with the cash position of the water utility. There was no interest in the computation, so it's really just letting the water utility hold that cash for another year.
Follow up.
And then we would reevaluate at the end of 24. But as was shown, we'll likely be in a much better cash position for the water utility at that time because we'll have had a full year of the new rate.
Follow up from Mr. Robinson.
No, I would move to defer the 2023
Yes.
loan payment from the water utility to the sewer utility.
All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a second by Mr.
I'll
Force.
second.
Do you have some comments, Mr. Force, or, nope, Mr. Jean? Anyone? All right, so we have a motion to defer the loan payment. So all of those in favor can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. On to item number 6, discussion and possible action approving the proposal and service agreement for the renewal of the cross-connection control program through HydroCore.
You want to take that, Scott?
Sure. This, HydroCorp has been doing this in commercial and industrial sites since 2016. This would just be another 2-year extension onto what they have been doing for us. Prices are relatively stagnant from the last contract that we had 2 years ago, so.
Questions or maybe a motion by this body? I have a, Mr. Jean?
I will so move.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by Elder Herbst. Any discussion here? All right, all of those in favor of approving the proposal and service agreement for the renewal of the cross-connection control program through HydroCore can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, thank you. All right, next up is item number 7, discussion on wastewater PFAS sampling results from January and February 2024.
that Ben.
Our wastewater superintendent
Yeah.
can.
Referencing the spreadsheet that's included in the packet, it's kind of easier to view than the separate sample results. The influent PFOA for January results was 6.11. The PFOS is 22.6. The effluent PFOA in January was 5.73. PFOS was 4.91. The biosolids, the combination in January was a combination of PFOA and PFOS, and that was a result of 8.5, well below the DNR standards where no further actions required. In February, influent results, PFOS 5.84, PFOA that was, and PFOS is 6.03. The effluent side, PFOA is 7.39, and the PFOS was 5.41 on the effluent. A combination of PFOA, PFOS for the biosolids was 6.3, and once again, well below the DNR standard, where no further actions required. March samples were sent out at the end of March, so we're awaiting results on that. Once we receive those results and we will review them with the commission, that will conclude our 6-month testing period that we had agreed upon. I guess I would like recommendation or advice if further testing is wanted. But keep in mind, this is the same testing that will be required upon issuance of our new discharge permit, once received.
Questions, comments from this body? Mr. Robinson?
So EPA came out with the final rule this morning relative to the maximum contaminant level. While not directly impacting these numbers, it has the potential to impact the effluent discharge numbers in the future. So as we look at that, the number went down from, if you're going with the state standard of 70 or DHS recommendation of 20, we're down to 4 for PFOA and PFOS, and there are standards for PFNA and PFHXS of 10, and there's sort of that hazard index concept of cumulative impact. Have we begun to look at, we've had some elevated readings of PFOS in our influent. Have we begun to look at the issue of source from some of the industrial generators? Because there may be long-term implications to our system and ultimately costs to the utility if the source isn't identified.
Correct. We have we've been working with the city of Schofield. They discharge to the Wausau wastewater collection system. So we've been having them do some testing alongside with us. I believe we agreed to 3 months of testing. So we do have those results. They're not extremely elevated, but there's some potential there. So that will be looked at.
But I think, again, when the new wastewater discharge permit is up, we may, that may or may not impact the numbers, but you've got the regulatory standards and you've got the permit numbers and other things. It's just something we should keep an eye on and look for opportunities to try to identify sources and where there is a point source, if you will, begin to work with those industries to try to mitigate or reduce the number.
Definitely.
I think the other thing that we're looking at is the basins within the city and how we have it broken up, and so Ben and I have been talking about at some point this year starting to take samples in those separate basins, potentially from lift stations or grab samples from, multiple areas, and then trying to narrow down possibly where we could have those. We started with Schofield, but yeah.
Correct.
And so we'll compile those numbers as we move forward and bring them back to this commission as we get those all put together as well.
Mr. Jean?
When do we expect the new permit to be issued?
It's a good question.
Oh.
I don't know what the status of it is right now. I'm hoping by mid-summer,
Oh, good.
at least that we'll receive the draft, I'm hoping.
Mr. Force?
Ben, are we, just to cover basics here, let's say on phosphorus, we have a phosphorus limit, and that's based on a maximum contaminant level, that's based on the river water quality. Are we going to see similar rules and regs regarding PFAS? Do you think? I mean, do we know what the PFAS content is in the Wisconsin River that we're discharging to? And
I think there's some preliminary numbers available. Susan Wakowitz is very familiar with that. Do you foresee any maximum contaminant level numbers for the Wisconsin, discharge into Wisconsin, if I could pull you into this?
Surface water. I mean, I thought I remembered 20 parts per trillion at the Wisconsin River when the last testing. You might need to hit the mic.
It's been a while since we've looked at it, but we did look at some of the background testing. I will say that the data, I mean, in my opinion, is pretty limited. So yeah, there are some background numbers like at that 10 to 20-ish parts per trillion level of like PFOA and PFOS, I think. Just, again, going based on memory. But at this point, I've not heard anything from DNR as far as specific discharge limits.
would you expect it in the next 2-3 years?
I don't think they're going to be prepared for that. I think a lot of like, and I can say that looking at the DNR permit process for reissuing WPDS permits, it's really focusing on monitoring at this point and source reduction. Those are the things that they're really going to be, I think, targeting, at least from the information that we're seeing right now.
I had a question for Ben, too. On the dryer on and off, do I read this that the dryer is still not functioning properly?
Those are just dates that we've sampled when the dryer's on or off to see how that kind of impacts.
Doesn't seem to have any impact.
Doesn't, not right now.
Thank you.
Other comments? I guess since Mr. Robinson brought up the new EPA legally enforceable standard, I just want to make a point that, while the EPA noted that the maximum contaminant level now they're looking at for PFOA and PFAS individually is 4 parts per trillion, they have set a non-enforceable MCL at 0. And that's what they're saying right now. But those individual maximum contaminant levels of 10 parts per trillion for the PFMA and the Gen X and the PFHSX and the PFHS are also going to probably be something you'll be talking about in the future as well. I do have some concerns for other municipalities who are looking at, the testing and informing over the next 3 years and then getting it fixed by the next 5 years. But I'm really grateful that Wausau won't have to worry about that. All right, moving on. Next up is item number 8. Discussion and possible action approving a biannual contract for septic hauler dumping at the wastewater treatment facility.
Go ahead, Ben.
As part of the NR 281.49 code, there's verbiage in there that permits are required for haulers to dump at a wastewater facility. Currently, the city of Wausau does not have any permits or contracts with these haulers. So I propose that we follow the code and implement a contract with each one of the haulers. It'll allow us to have more enforcement and discipline with the haulers and keep track of who's coming in and who's not. I've had some haulers just show up without any permission and dump, and we've actually caught them on camera, so I've had conversations. They currently are able to dump at the wastewater treatment plant, but now they're being surcharged for it. So, but it'll help only having these contracts in place with the haulers.
Makes sense. Any questions or comments, or maybe a motion? I have Mr. Robinson making.
I would move to approve the biennial contracts for septic hauler dumping.
All right, I have a second by Mr. Force. Any questions? All right, all of those in favor of approving a biannual contract for septic hauler dumping at the wastewater treatment facility can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Alrighty, that passes. Thank you. Next up is item number 9, discussion and possible action on approving the contract with IT Pipes for the purchase of sewer televising software in conjunction with the new TV van.
I'll let Ben or Ryan, they've been working on this for quite some time.
Sure. The current contract that we're looking for approval on is the new software that'll be used with the new TV van. It'll allow us to, the old software is it's not supported anymore. And this new software is gonna allow us to do more in-depth tracking and trending, and it's actually cooperative pricing, so we followed suit with the requirements on that end of it. 3-year contract, first year is a little elevated due to the implementation and bringing in all the information off the old software into the new system. Then the subsequent years, year 2 and 3 are less, as you can see, the 14,725. If we agree to the 3-year term, we'll be invoiced annually on this.
Mr. Robinson?
One of the questions that I had when I looked at it, we're using their cloud for data storage. If we don't renew with them, do we have access to that information that is in the cloud after the contract period? Or is there a backup that we would have access to that information?
That's a good question. If I could pull Ryan Dwelly in on this conversation. I'm not familiar with whose iCloud we'll be using, if it's the city's or theirs.
Ryan Dwelly, City of Wausau Collection Systems Supervisor. So IT Pipes is managing the cloud, but they said that if we separate or anything, they would get our information at that time. So they're managing it, they're storing it at this point. But if, like I said, we separate, it's our information. We can take that information and put it towards, converting it to a different company.
So we probably just would have to make sure that we have adequate storing for that data,
Yeah,
should we need it.
there's a lot of storage that takes place when you're televising, and we're gonna do a lot more of it, doing laterals in the future too, so.
And follow up, Mr. Robinson, and then Mr.
Well,
Morris.
I would just want to encourage us to make sure that we've got the terms of that transfer of data spelled out, because I'd hate to be saying, well, we want to access the data, and they'll say, sure, for $50,000. So if we can get clarity relative to
Yeah.
the terms of the transfer and minimize our exposure at the back end, that would be great.
And probably making sure we're working with CCITC, which I assume you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was in the information, but CCIT and the Attorney's Office, they reviewed the contract, so they kind of gave it their stamp at this point.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Force?
Ryan, as long as you're here, IT is new to me. I'm somewhat familiar with the industry, but what do you like about IT?
Some of the workability that we can have out in the field. It looked, as far as ease of operation, I did demos on 2 other software companies. On the back end, not just the usability for the crew, but on the back end and support for myself in the office or for the rest of the city. It seemed like a really solid company. You make a phone call, they answer. You're not waiting. Like our current company, you make a phone call and you hope that someone answers, or you hope that you get an answer within 2 weeks when you need an answer right now. So that goes a long way with this. But some of the benefits that they offered that is going to help track where we are in the city, what we've done in 2023, 24, everything in the future. Not every software is capable of doing that, and this one is.
Where are they located? Do they have a local rep?
They have a local rep. I can't remember. He's, I think, based in near Milwaukee at this
Okay.
point. But there's other municipalities that have switched to them. The current one that we have, they do have other software that is out there, like a newer version, I would call it. But some of the mapping features that they use, they just don't, they're not up to date like some of the other companies, and they can't offer what the other companies can offer at this time.
You mean IT can offer what other
Yes,
companies
IT
can't?
Pipes can offer it. Our current company that we're going through, their new version of it, they can't offer some of these things that we're looking at.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, it'll help with like an asset management, as an asset management tool for myself and the city going forward. So, yeah.
All right, any other comments or questions? Thank you. Oh, I guess we need a motion, though. I have a motion by Alder Herbst and a second by Mr. Robinson. All of those in favor of approving the contract with IT Pipes for the purchase of sewer televising software in conjunction with the new TV van can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? I don't see any. Thank you. Before we adjourn, I just want to take a point of personal privilege and thank you all. This is my last meeting. It's been an honor to serve with you for the last 4 years, and I know that you'll continue the good work of this community. So thank you. And I also want to thank Alder Herbst for her dedication to this cause as well. It's been hard work, but we did it. So thank you. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Alder Herbst, and I have a second by Commissioner Jean. All in favor can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, thanks, everyone.